Happy Easter, everybody. During this lockdown period, I had some really great intentions. I'd intended to make a video every day during these holidays about well-being, and I'd imagined that these videos would be really popular and that I'd get hundreds and maybe even thousands of views as it went viral. And I imagined that this would be the start of my career as a renowned well-being and meditation teacher. After my first video and getting about 6 or 7 views, I realised this wasn't going to happen. And this has actually been the case with so many things that I've planned during lockdown. I thought, well, I'm going to get fit every day. I'm going to run and go to the gym every day. I'm going to read 10, 12 more books during lockdown. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And in fact, my lockdown has largely consisted of laying on the couch, scrolling through Facebook videos, watching cats do funny things, or watching people do their America's Got Talents auditions. Maybe lockdown has been similar for you. Maybe you've had great intentions, and maybe like me, you've eventually let that go and just settled into what is a period of not being able to do a lot. And if so, that's good, because as I said in one of my earlier chapel videos, this time is a little bit like an enforced Lent. Remember, Lent is the time leading up to Easter to prepare us for Easter. And Lent is about an emptying. It's about a stopping doing in order to prepare ourselves to really understand the message of Easter. And so now let's think, what is the message of Easter? What is Easter all about? Well, Easter is the time when we remember that Jesus, who came as a teacher, as a leader, a healer, a prophet, as many things 2,000 years ago, that at this time he was arrested and he was sentenced to death by crucifixion, and he died. And so Easter is the time we remember Jesus' death. By our modern standards, and probably the standards of the time in which he lived, Jesus' life was a huge failure. Jesus had a lot of things on his side. He had immense power. He showed this through his healings, through the miracles that he performed, walking on water. There were times when Romans tried to seize him and arrest him, and it says that because it wasn't his time, they just fell away. He also had a huge amount of popularity. People followed him everywhere in their thousands. So he really had gone viral. And also, he had a huge amount of resources on his side. He was able to turn water into wine. I know a lot of people who would follow him around just for that very fact. He was able to turn a few loaves and fishes into a meal that fed 5,000 people. So he had power, he had status, he had resources. And yet, he allows himself to be arrested. He doesn't put up a fight. He doesn't even defend himself when he's put on trial, even though the charges against him are made up. And he allows himself to be crucified. That is, killed by being nailed to a cross. And so the natural question then to ask is, why, if Jesus' life was such a failure in worldly terms, has his death and the symbol of his death, the cross, become so central to the Christian faith? And why is it that we have remembered it year after year for 2,000 years? Well, I think the answer to that we can find in the Bible, and I'm going to read from the letter to the Philippians, which talks about Jesus' death. It says, "Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but he didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of being like God and took on the status of a slave, became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. Jesus' life was so contrary, so different to the way that we live. We try to build ourselves up. We try to create a following. We try to achieve something, to become a success. We try to accumulate to ourselves status or possessions or power. These were all the things that Jesus let go of. When the time came for him even to let go of his life, he didn't resist it. Why? Why was he able to do that? And why did he do that? I think the key to understanding Jesus' life and his death is that phrase that I read in the Bible, that he didn't consider his status with God, of being equal with God, something to cling to. Or in other versions it says something to be grasped, to be held onto. And you can see that Jesus lives a very different life from the way that we live. We grasp. We try to hold on to things. We're afraid to let go. We're afraid to lose things because we think it will make us less. And behind all of that fear of losing, of having less, of not being noticed, of not being important, of not having lots of things, behind all of that is the fear of death, when we'll ultimately have to even let go of this life, this body, this form of existence. But Jesus didn't cling. He didn't cling to anything, not to people's opinion of him, not to possessions, not to status, and particularly not even to life, not even to staying alive. He let that go as well, because he understood something that's right at the very heart of the Easter story. Jesus understood that he was made in God's image. Not only that he was one with God. And because he knew that there was a part of him that couldn't be touched by the things of the world. It couldn't be touched by whatever others thought of him. It couldn't be touched by his status. It was unaffected by his success or his significance. And it was even something that could not be touched by death. He knew that there was a part of him that is eternal, that will go on forever. And the message of Easter that he came to show us is that that is true for us also. He came as a human being to show us what a human being is. And he lived as a human being to show us how human beings should live. Not in fear, not in grasping, not in trying to hold on to things for fear of what will happen if we lose them. Instead, he bravely and without fear accepted the loss of all things, even his life, to show us that there's no need to be afraid, that even death can't destroy who and what we are. But of course, Jesus' death is only half the story. There's a part 2 to this. That's Jesus' resurrection. And I'm going to focus on that for a future sermon. But let me just finish this sermon by reading the rest of that passage that I read before about Jesus' crucifixion. It said, because of that obedience to death, God lifted him high and honored him far beyond anyone or anything else ever. And so there is this huge happy ending to what looks like a tragedy, to what looks like disaster, losing everything, even his life. There is this unimaginable happy ending where he's actually transformed into something so much more than all of the things he lost. And that's the message of Easter, everybody. The message of Easter is we don't need to be afraid of the things that we are losing. We don't need to be afraid and try to cling on to the things that we have or to grasp after things that we don't have, because we are so much more than we realize. And often it's not until we lose these things, it's not until we go through some kind of loss, some kind of letting go, that we realize we were always more than we imagined, that we never needed those things like we thought we did. And so this is the secret of life that the world can't teach you, that actually it's in letting go that we gain so much more. It's in losing often that we win, and that our lives and who we are is of so much value and worth so much that even death will not destroy it. This is the hope that we have, and it's a hope that we remember and we reinforce every time we remember Jesus' death and resurrection at Easter. Have a happy Easter, everybody. Don't eat too many chocolate eggs. I probably will. And I'm looking forward to seeing you when we all get back.